So, India's got this plan for a new jet engine. And let me tell you, it is so risky, it's got experts all over the world raising their eyebrows. Today, we're going to break down this high-stakes plan. It's a story where incredible ambition meets some pretty serious technical danger.
At the very heart of this is a really daring idea. They want to conduct the first ever in-flight test of their homegrown Kaveri jet engine. And this is a project that's been in the works for decades.
So is this a stroke of genius, or is it just, way too dangerous? Let's get into it, because the answer isn't so simple. The details here reveal a fascinating story of ambition, innovation, and some serious, calculated risk.
All right, so what's the actual plan on the table? Well, India's gas turbine research establishment wants to take its Kaveri engine and test it for the very first time in the air on a Russian-made Sukhoi Su-30MKI. That's one of the top fighter jets in the Indian Air Force.
And you've got to understand, this is a huge leap. I mean, until now, every single test on this engine has happened in the nice, controlled environment of a laboratory. Taking it airborne, that's a whole new ballgame. It's the only way to see how it'll actually perform in the real world.
And this is where we hit the big fundamental problem, the thing that makes this whole plan so incredibly risky.
Just look at these numbers for a second. The Su-30MKI's standard engine, the AL-31, it pushes out around 88 kilonewtons of thrust. The Kaveri engine, it's sitting at about 51. That is a massive power difference for an aircraft this big.
This chart just lays it all out, right? We're talking about a power gap of nearly 40%. I mean, that immediately makes you wonder about flight safety, right? How would that even work? It brings up huge questions about aerodynamics and just the sheer complexity of making it happen.
So why on earth would they even think about doing this? Well, to get that, we have to rewind a bit and look at the Kaveri engine's long and, let's be honest, kind of troubled past. It wasn't originally supposed to be for this at all. You see, this engine's story starts way back in the 80s. It was originally designed for India's own lightweight Tejas fighter. But here's the kicker. It just couldn't deliver the power they needed. So now the plan is to use it in a much, much smaller unmanned combat drone.
And this quote really says it all. An engine unfit for a combat aircraft is intended to be tested on a combat aircraft. Wow. I mean, that pretty much sums up the wild irony at the heart of this whole thing. It really highlights the disconnect.
So what India's proposing is not exactly standard procedure. So how is this stuff usually done? Let's take a look at a safer, more standard approach, and you'll see just how big a risk this really is.
Think about the F-22 Raptor. When the US was developing its super advanced engines for that plane, they didn't just bolt them onto a prototype fighter and hope for the best. Nope, they did things very, very differently.
They used something called a flying test bed. In the F-20's case, it was a specially modified Boeing 747. It's a much safer way to do things. You have this huge, stable aircraft with 3 other perfectly good engines to rely on if something goes wrong with the test engine.
And when you put them side by side, the difference is just night and day, isn't it? On one hand, you have India's plan, using a frontline fighter jet which is super complex and risky. And on the other, you have the standard international practice, a dedicated test plane that's way, way safer and much simpler to work with.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question, right? If it's so risky, so unconventional, why is India even thinking about doing this?
Well, it really comes down to a perfect storm of problems. India has this huge fleet of Su-30MKIs that needs modernizing, and that includes those Russian engines. But with sanctions on Russia, getting parts and support has become a massive headache. And to top it all off, they just don't have one of those fancy flying test beds of their own.
So when you look at it that way, this plan, as wild as it sounds, is really a shortcut born out of necessity. It's their way of trying to push their own homegrown engine program forward with the tools they actually have, even if those tools are far from perfect for the job.
And that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Is this a necessary innovation, or is it just a dangerously risky shortcut? What you should take away from this is that it's not just some simple technical test. It's a huge strategic gamble for India, one that could totally change the future of its aerospace independence.